Tihe Moriora, Ina mana, ina reo, ina hawawha. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody, my name's Andrew Coker, I'm the Chief Executive of Priority1. And I just want to say it's my privilege to welcome you all here, and what an amazing turnout. In fact, Gail and I were very worried we'd run out of seats, and I see no one standing at this stage. And we thought that seeing this was the opening night in Tauranga of 50 Shades of Grey, we might have thinned a few of you out. For those inveterate tweeters, the hashtag for tonight's event is #BayInnovate. A special welcome to our guest, Derek Handley. Derek, welcome to the Bay of Plenty and to Tauranga. It's wonderful to have someone of your calibre here, and I first heard you speak, as I mentioned to you, at the ICE Ideas Conference in Auckland in 2011, and it's been my ambition to have you come to Tauranga ever since then. And I know Gail, our Office Administrator, has mercilessly pursued your PA, so thank you so much for making this visit here. A few acknowledgements. Firstly, thank you to those elected members of Western Bay District Council, Tauranga City Council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council that have made it here tonight. I know your head's down in tenure planning, so thank you for that. Also acknowledge Priority1's Chair, Murray Denyer, and those board members of Priority1 that are here. So before commencing the order of events, a few brief words on Priority1 for those who are maybe less familiar about us. It'd be simple to describe us as simply the economic development agency of for Tauranga and Western Bay of Plenty. In fact, we're a movement that comprises businesses and individuals committed to positive change here. And we're a movement that partners with councils and others to see transformed an historically low-wage, low-skill economy that's had as its key driver population growth historically. Fundamental to doing this is our ability as a region to grow, foster and attract talented, skilled and creative people, and equally to grow and attract those businesses that need them. Importantly, we need to create educational and employment opportunities for our young people. Equally importantly, we need to preserve what makes this environment special and sees this region have the privileged ownership of what I think, personally, is the best brand in the world, the Bay of Plenty. Here do I give you a sense of the man, Derek Handley, by way of introduction. Maybe I'll leave that to others and to Derek. Sir Ray Avery has this to say about him. Derek is fearless, a natural leader with a razor-sharp mind, wisdom beyond his years and crazy enough to believe that he can change the world. He is the promise of the world we would like to have and is just getting started. I'll also share with you a short video to allow us all to gain some sense of Derek's view on how New Zealand could and should lead the world, why he believes New Zealand businesses need to look at doing good as well as doing well, and why he believes the traditional business model is flawed.
Our generation is in the middle of two really major transitions in the world, and one is the environmental situation that we've got and the serious issues that we have, and the second is this increasing awareness that how we've traditionally measured success and what works in the last century is not what will define this century. So if New Zealand wants to lead in the world, it needs to lead on those two issues. I think, as a person or as a company or as an organisation, how you lead is based on what your goal is. And traditionally, the world's goal is growth, and the world's goal is productivity, and the world's measurement is GDP. And it's very clear to an increasing number of people that that's a flawed measure. If we are a country that wants to lead in the way that we have on nuclear and the way that we have on voting, we should be leading the world and redefining what success is. So if your North Star is growth and GDP, and that's all you design your policies around, then you're going to come up with an outcome that's not representative of what I think this generation wants success to be. We've just come from a couple of decades of You can make money however, and you use some of it to offset some of the damage you might have done socially or environmentally. And that was known as corporate social responsibility, but we need to move into a new era, which is the actual business model itself creates social solutions and environmental solutions. There is a real diversity problem. I think it's a significant issue. The majority of people here are men, businessmen, old, and there are not enough artists, designers, anthropologists, people who are in the problems themselves, not just the ones working on the problems. There are not enough people who can't afford to be here, because those people, that set of different people that aren't here, are necessary to create new solutions and new ideas. And those people always have existed on the fringes. New ideas come from the fringe. I think there needs to be a lot more embracing in the tent of the fringe.
In preparing for tonight's presentation, I'd like to share with you a brief conversation with someone that has become a friend to the Priority1 team, Ian Taylor. And some of you may recall Ian Taylor, animation research, based in Dunedin. We've had him here at several events, including in this room. Like Derek, he's a formidable entrepreneur on the global stage. I rang Ian yesterday and asked him to give me a sense of the man that is Derek Handley. He said, and if you'll excuse the language, Andrew, he's the guy that does shit. I'm just the guy that talks about it. I think anyone who knows Ian Taylor would beg to differ on his view of himself, but his view on Derek is impressive. Ian finished by saying, Derek is a man who does good, and is a good man, Andrew. As you'd expect, Derek has his own entrepreneurial way of doing things, even when making presentations. Instead of Derek joining us on stage for a traditional presentation, he's opted for an interview format. Facilitating the conversation with Derek will be Tina Jenin. Tina is well known and respected for her work in growing Tauranga's entrepreneurial ecosystem and her ability to connect the dots between people and opportunities. Tina launched the Plenty of Innovation program for Enterprise Angels, is a national facilitator for Startup Weekend, and assists many other early stage growth initiatives, including Young Innovator Awards. Tina's executive work for the Plus group of companies at Newnham Park is fostering real and sustainable growth and innovation. Tina, if you'd like to come to the stage, and I would ask all of you to put your hands together and give a very warm welcome to entrepreneur, investor, and co-founder of and chair of the B team, Derek Handley.
I'm not sure if my mic's on either.
I kept it off in case I went to the toilet. I've heard of really bad stories. Can we hear you now?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're already on. This is fun, though.
Yes. Bit of an icebreaker.
There you go.
Before we start with the interview questions, I just really want to put our hands together for Priority1. This would not be possible without them, and I know it was a long journey to get you here, Derek, with your busy schedule.
Not distance-wise, but time, yeah,
right.
It took a while. Yeah.
Just the sheer persistence, and also the interview questions. A lot of time and energy was put into that to bring the value to the community, and I want to thank Sally from Tuscany as well for that effort. So can we thank you? Thank you, Andrew.
Before you start, though, can I also say something?
Of course.
Thanks for your introduction, and thanks for having me. I got here yesterday, and we've got a few days planned to think about things, and I like going to new places that have beautiful environments to start to think about the year ahead, and I generally do that around this time of the year. And I kind of operate on a March to March year, because I always find that Christmas and New Year, your family and everything, and you really can't think about things to think about what you're going to do the next year. So I always end up finishing those thoughts in February and then thinking, setting my goals for March. But to you guys particularly, I think that presentation was really, truly representative of how you build a company. So I think the program that you've just undergone is really impressive to compress that into 2 weeks. Any company I've ever been a part of or tried to be a part of or tried to start or started myself underwent exactly the same things that you underwent. So to know that that's a real process and a real reflection of the world is something that you should take to heart, because often you run through simulations or competitions or awards and it actually doesn't reflect the real world. So the process you went through is almost exact same process I would have gone through if I had 2 weeks to figure out whether you could build that. So I think that's a testament to the organization that created the award or the competition or whatever you want to call it. And it's a testament to the organizations that have supported it and the people that have supported it. You just want to create like 10 more of those every year, and then you start to create what you want, which is a movement. Because at one a year, you probably won't get there, but it's a really, really great start.
Fantastic. And do you mind, as a side note, letting people know where you're staying? Because this was my favorite part.
I think it's called Top 10 Holiday Papamoa Beach.
Papamoa Top 10 Holiday Park, and that's true, just the true Kiwi.
I thought I was like
culture, and
I was
just
wondering,
love that.
like, is that the name Top 10, or is it like they've been ranked Top 10 and so they've put it in the name? And I was really confused. I didn't understand it, but actually it's a chain called Top 10.
It is
amazing. Put the ranking in your name. That's pretty good branding.
Yeah. And with the weather and the view of the beach, I think that was a really good choice. Yeah.
I do too.
Okay, should we get started?
Sure.
Okay. Question 1. Derek.
That sounds like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Well, this is the official part of the ceremony.
Okay.
I mean, you know what those unofficial questions are.
So
we don't want to get to
wrong,
those.
do I have to go?
I haven't decided yet. Okay, question 1.
I have a member of family here, so I could call her, but I need to phone a friend.
Anybody got a lifeline? No. So, Derek, you've been described on many occasions as one of New Zealand's most successful entrepreneurs. You can claim Richard Branson as a friend. But in true inspirational Kiwi can-do style, at the tender age of 22, you failed. You faced significant failure. Your story highlights how to leverage opportunity through adversity, and possibly shows how being a Kiwi gives you a competitive advantage in your thinking, in your approach. So what do you think is unique about your approach? What's been unique over the years? And what has made you the successful entrepreneur that you are?
Okay, that's a good question. I think I can get this one right. First of all, I don't think of myself as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in New Zealand. I think that by the traditional measure of success of an entrepreneur, it would normally be money, turnover, exit, sale price, those kind of things. And when you look at many other people even in my age group or above, like Rod at Xero or Sam at TradeMe, they are in a totally different league from a business point of view, from a financial and what you would traditionally think of as success in business. But when I first started building businesses, I thought that was the measure of success. And so that was how I aspired, and that's how I measured whether I was doing a good job or not.
Mm-hmm.
I've since changed a lot, but I think we can get onto that a bit later. And I think what the difference between when people think of me as a successful entrepreneur, I think the difference is that at 22, I decided to build global companies from New Zealand. That was the goal, right? That was always the goal. And that, I think, is a different thing, because even people who are 30 or 40 or 50 are scared of doing that. And my brother and I, who started the company, we all thought from the beginning, well, if you're going to build a company, what we've heard about this is it's really, really hard. Yeah. And so you might as well try and create something that is global, leading, and from the very beginning shows that you can build something international from New Zealand. Because that was what everyone was talking about in 2000, 2001, 2002. They were thinking, how do you build new companies that go global from the beginning? And I remember when Sam Morgan from TradeMe came up to our tiny little office and he was talking about building TradeMe, and I was building another organization that was a marketplace online, but it was for a global audience. And I was thinking, Sam, why do you want to build, you're going to start a company, why do you want to build this company just for New Zealand? It's not, And of course, fast forward 7 years later, and he gets bought for $750 million, and I'm, yeah, it's fair enough. But, so it's just in my DNA. I've always been wired to try and do something that's globally relevant and globally new. And I think that was why people consider maybe the story of the company we built, which was called the Hyperfactory, was more interesting and more inspiring than maybe other companies that were far more financially successful. So part one is always thinking from a global perspective and thinking about how do you create things from New Zealand that can be internationally amazing. The second thing is, which was something that happened to me at university, or I happened to it, I'm not really sure, but I went to university, I did architecture studies, and I did design, and I also did finance and marketing. And I was very conflicted about those two disciplines, and I loved them both for different reasons, but I managed to enable them to coexist, although there was no one in finance and marketing school at Victoria that was down in, like that was up on the hill in Wellington, that was also down in the architecture and design school, which was down in the city, and vice versa. There was no one doing design and architecture that was going up the hill to do finance and marketing. And the diversity of those thought streams, I think, has instilled in me the ability to think very differently about things, because I think about things from a very business-oriented perspective, a financial perspective, then I swing and I think about them from a design perspective or an architecture perspective. And the interesting thing about architecture was that I thought I wanted to be an architect of buildings. It took me several years to realize I wanted to be an architect of ideas and organizations. And it's the same thought process to design a movement or an organization or the B team or the Hyperfactory than it is to design a really breakthrough building or town. So those two things, the global and then this kind of constant tension between design thinking, creative thinking, and finance, using the engines of commerce, were the fundamental bases. The third piece, I think, was forcing myself to extract myself out of the day-to-day very often. And that's partly what I'm doing today and tomorrow and Tauranga on this Papamoa Beach top 10 holiday camp. It's escaping from the world, turning the Wi-Fi off, and just thinking about things with pen and paper and just really going through what some of the bigger ideas that I have are for the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, and some of the things that I want to do in the next year. And so forcing that reflection on myself, which I found my peers would never force the time out of their lives to do that. Those are the three things that I think have always helped me create a different path. So forcing myself to have the time to think about a different path, thinking it in a way that combines design and commerce and the way the world's going, and always thinking, well, if you're going to come up with an idea, you might as well come up with something that's globally at the edge. That's a very long answer. You asked like 4 questions in one, let's be serious.
I know. Okay. Don't give me that much credit. Question 2. Are we ready to move on to question 2?
I actually don't have my phone, so I couldn't even call a friend if I needed to.
We can get you a phone if you need one. You just call out. Corporate social responsibility. It was referred to in the video. It's been a catchphrase for businesses globally for some time. You've said that corporate social responsibility is not enough. You've said that New Zealand business needs to look at doing well and doing good. So you've also said that if your North Star is growth in GDP, then you're going to come up with an outcome that actually doesn't represent the future generation, what people really want right now. Why do you hold that view?
Well, I think people or civilizations, they evolve constantly and try to do the right thing, and for the problems that they face at the time. So when you think about the beginning of business 400, 500 years ago, companies had to have a license to operate, it was a charter. Basically, they were issued a license to become a business from the state. I think the first company really was maybe the East India Company that was issued a charter from the UK king or queen, whoever it was at the time. And the intention was to kind of go out into the world, bring things from foreign countries, and create trade and learn about how other people live and have things that you have never seen before or you've never experienced before, whether it's tea or whatever it might be. We then moved into this age of industrial revolution where people thought that machines were going to create a much more efficient society, and that companies were the best mechanism to effect the Industrial Revolution, and they create lots of jobs, lots of wealth, lots of income. And I think largely that experiment was successful when there were extreme numbers of people in poverty in the Western world and other places, and when it didn't matter what you did in the US versus in China, and there was no real interdependency from a planetary perspective on the environment or on other aspects of society. Then we moved into this age last century where it was the ownership and the control of companies was transferred from shareholders to managers. So this agency transfer which happened where CEOs became far more powerful than the shareholders, if you think about public companies and the largest companies in the world. And you started to, in effect, have companies that became bigger than countries, which we have today, bigger than countries, bigger than governments, and they operate in every country in the world. And again, created lots of wealth and lots of job and lots of innovation. But now in the last 30 years, we've come to a point where everything you do in the world affects some other part of the country, or some other part of the world, particularly from a planetary perspective. And this concept and this notion that capitalism will solve all our problems through the trickle-down theory, which is really the notion that was picking up steam in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, is clearly not solving them. Right? We still have 2 billion people who are under $2 a day. We have 1 billion people who don't have access to water. We have 500 million people who can't even read. So if all these things were in theory solvable through capitalism, they should be solved by now, considering Apple's just about to become $1 trillion company. So clearly the system isn't working. And then when you have things like the financial crisis of 2008, it's clear that the underpinning of the system, which is finance and insurance, is also broken. So where we are in the world, I think, is at a cusp of this awareness that what we've done in the past 100 years isn't going to get us to where we need to be in the next 50. When I say 50 instead of 100, because from a climate perspective, people really think we have about 30 to 40 years to figure out what's going on and fix it. From a diversity perspective, a biodiversity perspective, from a climate warming perspective, whatever way you want to look at it, the goals of the global community are to reduce climate issues significantly by 2050. And companies are a big part of that. So when you look at the whole scope of the world, it's clear to anyone who takes enough time to step out of it to go, the way we're doing stuff now isn't going to fix this. We're still going to be here with 3 more billion people in the planet, plus the 2 billion that are at $2 a day now. And if we keep doing the operating model that we have, we're not going to get there. So part 1 is we're not going to get there with the current system. Part 2 is governments are running out of money. Part 3 is nonprofits and foundations are struggling to come up with solutions that can scale, so we need a new model and we need a new way of doing things. CSR was the theory in the 90s that companies could make as much money as they wanted, and it didn't matter how they made it, as long as they used some of their profits to give some of it away, to offset some of the bads. And that's obviously not going to be meeting the scale of the problem. So what we've been doing at the B team and other conversations around the world is thinking, well, how do you rethink business models so that they help solve the problems while you create wealth, as opposed to creating wealth and then using some of it to solve problems. I think we're at the very early stage of this movement, but I think it's picking up steam at an enormous rate. In the last week, we've had 2 amazing breakthroughs on 2 different fronts. One, the largest sovereign wealth fund, which is from Norway, I think, which has $600 billion under assets under management, announced that they had last year sold all their climate investments. In a huge signal to the world that, these are custodians of the largest pool of money in the world, saying, not we don't like coal because it's bad, but actually it's a bad investment because all these sectors are going to go out of business because they're bad for the planet, and we need to think on 10 and 20-year cycles. The second one was Blackstone, who's one of the largest hedge fund managers in the world, setting up a whole new division for what we coin impact investing, which is investing for money and financial returns with social outcomes at the same time. So looking for business models that have both of those. And so when you have hedge fund managers doing that, you're starting to change the conversation. So we're starting to move in the right direction.
And just a real quick follow-up question. You talked in the first question about sort of how you cross-pollinated with your learning. How does that cross-pollinated thinking that's your underpinning impact the way that you work in that arena? How does it change the way you see it and how you solve problems?
I think that's the opportunity. It's pretty exciting to be able to think, what are the kind of people that you can bring around that table when you're talking about those discussions. Yeah. And they're not the people you might have brought around the table 10 years ago. So if you have a board and you're a big company, you might start thinking about bringing in the people that you would normally have been in adversity to. So activists, trade unions, Greenpeace, whatever it is, whether it's social organizations that know your community's problems, and people that would generally not be sitting around a business table are now being asked to be involved in the conversation because they know about the issues that businesses actually should be a part of helping solve. So bringing diversity into boards is a big thing. The video that you saw up there was me speaking about Davos, which was the big World Economic Forum conference a month ago.
That's our next question.
Okay. And when I was talking about diversity, I was talking about every type of diversity.
Yeah.
But in New Zealand, for example, from a gender diversity perspective, we've always been really good. But the reports that they produce every year has shown us consistently slipping in the last few years.
Thank you for that.
I think we should fix it.
Fix what?
Diversity.
Oh, well, let's talk about that then.
I know you said I have to wait for the next question.
No, well, no. I'll let you make the rules. Just don't tell Andrew that. So talk about that a little bit before we move on. How can we fix diversity?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as like setting goals and targets, but it's further on what you were saying. It's about thinking about what kind of diverse minds, whether they're, diversity is everything from ethnicity to age to gender, that you can bring around the table of your organization, whatever kind of organization it is, to help you think in a broader way and challenge your existing thing, challenge your status quo, and ideally come up with new solutions. So everyone that is a part of any organization, when they think about a problem or when they're creating governance structures, thinking more broadly about how they might bring in to play those kind of factors.
Right, and I guess what I hear you saying is that can happen at any level. So,
exactly.
I mean, the people sitting in this room, how can they contribute to that?
Well, in your own organizations, you can contribute by creating, well, first of all, there's hiring policies, right? So how you are proactively being biased towards particular areas in a good way. There's board and governance policies, which I think is where it really is, and that's where a big leverage point is, because a lot of stuff starts at that level. And when I talked about, old man at Davos, it's the same situation with our corporate boards in New Zealand, largely. And I think those are the kind of things that need to be addressed.
Great. I was actually wrong. Davos is the fourth question. Oh, okay. So you'll get a break from that for a minute. Question 3. You have said that if New Zealand wants to lead the world, it needs to move into an era where the actual business model itself creates social solutions and environmental solutions. In your view, what is New Zealand's role or lead in this global push for social impact? And most importantly, how can the business community here play that pivotal and proactive role? We're looking for calls to action.
Okay. It's not easy to create like blanket calls to action, but
well, you've got 8 minutes.
I think from a New Zealand perspective, we have great opportunity, like the people in, basically, when you think about this issue, the people who are leading it are the Nordic countries, right? So going back to the Scandinavian countries. They're extremely progressive on these issues, as well as Netherlands. And for me, I see those countries as comparable to New Zealand, and I think the story about New Zealand is we can have all the similar values of those countries, but we actually have a beautiful, hot, warm place that people want to live. And we're finding that. We're finding that people who are really incredibly successful or talented on the world stage are wanting to move to New Zealand and live here. And so that will only continue as people get more fed up with the way other countries operate, the challenges that are in other countries. And From a business perspective, I just see New Zealand being able to create innovation and differentiation through these kind of strategies. So if I believe the next wave of competition is going to be how well you build business models that create positive impact on society and the environment, then I think New Zealand businesses should be trying to get ahead on that. You know, so it's similar to a wave where when Helen Clark was in power, she said, oh, the internet's coming, we should be part of the knowledge wave, which is true. But I also think that the next layer on top of that is, well, last decade it was about design. So Steve Jobs created a new conversation around design as a new competitive edge. I think the next 10, 20 years is about how you create new business models that create social and environmental solutions. That's your competitive edge. So New Zealand should be encouraged to produce as many business models and business leaders and corporate leaders to embrace that and pioneer it. From a community perspective, local government policies that can help foster entrepreneurs who are creating those kind of solutions are really important. I think local business leaders who are creating social and environmental targets within their business models are really important. And I think that pressure on bigger organizations in New Zealand to incorporate a sense of social output in their business models is also really important. So there's a number of different things you can do, or if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to start a business, I think always start a business nowadays that has a clear social outcome, a clear social metric. So if I was an entrepreneur back in where I was, 22, I would only, from that point on, if I was that today, I'd only be starting businesses that have very, very clear social intent.
So let's ground that a bit more. What does that look like? Is that People, Profit, Planet? Is that social enterprise? How would you frame that?
It could be any and all of these things. It's just, the question is, can you authentically ask, how will this business model positively impact the lives and the communities that you operate in with real issues, not what we've been taught at business school as being customer issues. So, customers have a problem, they have a pain. I mean, yeah, but we also have people who can't eat and go to school. So the customer pain is the way we've been taught to build businesses. But customer pain is almost now at this point where we're manufacturing it. Right? We're manufacturing, you need this. And what I mean is, it's a real issue that's grounded in community and problems. So it might be something that's a problem with the waterways, or it might be a problem that's about education and learning how to teach disadvantaged children, or it might be something about how do you get the workforce that's coming out, or the potential workforce that's coming out of prisons, into the community in a way that absorbs them properly. It might be about how do you build products that are fully circular. So how do you take waste from industrial processes and create new products out of them? So it can be in any part of those spectrum of the ecosystem. And there are more and more startups today that are being created to produce those outcomes, but also produce really great financial returns.
Yeah, and really, I was just about to ask you, what is that gray area between social programs and social enterprise? And is it that really just that it makes a profit? Or what is the difference for people that don't live in that?
Yeah, it's a hybrid, and it's a really interesting hybrid situation at the moment, because we have two legal forms pretty much everywhere in the world: non-profits and for-profits. Yeah. And we have this third element, which is the state. And you've been taught forever, if you're going to do good and solve social problems, go start a non-profit, pay people less, don't spend too much money on how you raise or build a brand or market, don't fail. It's all bullshit. I mean, you would never start a business that way. Yeah. And that's how we built the non-profit sector. And on the business side, you're going, business is just making money. Don't try and mix social with environment with making money. Don't worry about all those issues, just make money and solve them in another way. And that's how the structures are legally. So now you have this blurring spectrum of people who want to make money at different levels of return, trying to solve social problems. So at one end of the spectrum, you might have clean tech investors who want great, huge returns, but they're only investing in technology companies that create green or renewable solutions. Another of the spectrum, you might have someone who wants a lower return, but that has a whole raft of social outcomes that they want. And so there's a broad spectrum of different ways of doing it. And in the US at the moment, and increasingly globally, there's a movement to create new legal forms, which are called benefit corporations. And they're new legal structures. So you can create a benefit corporation in Delaware, which is where everyone in America incorporates,
and you put the social purpose in the Constitution, which protects you as a director from making a social decision over a purely financial decision. Because if you incorporate a normal company, arguably a shareholder could sue you if they think you've decided to do something more socially aligned that might put at risk some future profits. So your actual obligation is to just maximize money and not worry about those things. So with these two legal structures historically, we now have a new legal structure which is starting to emerge, the benefit corporation or the purpose corporation, which is you can build a business, you can make money, you can raise capital, you can raise debt, you can take in philanthropy if you want, but you must have a social purpose in your constitution. And that, I think, is where we're heading. And I think that's the most exciting thing to happen in business for a really, really long time.
And just real quickly, how does that, around a boardroom table, change sort of the duty of care for the board members at the governance level? Just as a hypothetical.
Yeah, I think in some states, like in Delaware, you actually have to have community stakeholders at the board. I don't even know if they have to be board members, but they have to be maybe observers. But there's actually legal, constitutional requirements for you to have representatives from the broader issues. So there's all sorts of different ways that I think these are brand new. Like Delaware created the benefit corporations in November. Wow. But they've been going in America for maybe 5 years.
Okay, great. Question 4. Derek, you attended Davos.
Do we have to speed up?
We do? No, we're doing fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Normally a clock over there.
I've got the clock.
Okay.
Do you want it?
You tell me how much time is left.
No, well, I'm doing question by question.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we're on track. You attended the Davos World Economic Forum in Switzerland just last month, right? Maybe 3-4 weeks ago. And there was a televised interview where you said, if we really want to create a productive and flourishing century, then we need to encourage diversity by inviting those on the fringe into the room, right? That was obviously just on the clip. The artists, the designers, the anthropologists who are part of the problem and are experiencing the problem. Do you think this view is relevant beyond that forum? And how is it relevant?
Yeah, designers, artists, anthropologists, and people who are in the problem. I didn't say they were part of the problem, although they may be. Yeah. So people that are actually challenged in the issues themselves.
Yep.
I think that. So, is it relevant to New Zealand? Is that what you're saying? Is it relevant to?
How does it extend beyond the forum? You get all those people talking at the forum. How does that translate outside that event? How is it relevant?
Back to your point about, the discussion we were talking about diversity, I think it's relevant at every level in society, right? Mm-hmm. So we were talking earlier, I was talking to the teachers of these guys, and we were talking about, the challenge in students having to focus on achieving NCA results when one of the teachers was saying, I want to take them into nature and, go for an experience. But the current, focus is just so relentless on grades. Yeah. If you look at the way the education system works, it has lots of challenges at every level. So I'm at AUT as an adjunct professor, not as an educator, but more as a provocateur of like, how do you create new models? And the system, however the system is designed, people will behave towards, right? So the system is designed to encourage people to achieve the best grades, then that's what will become most important to them. If they believe that's what will get them the job, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So in that particular environment, if you pick that apart and brought a lot of people into that discussion that had very varying views on what is success, how do you create a fulfilling life, how do you create valuable citizens, I think grades will end up very low, very, very low on most people's actual, when they look back on life, how important they were. And I know this is kind of a bad thing to say in front of students, but at the end of the day, you have to have a really holistic view of what you are as a person to live a fulfilling, happy, successful life, right? And if you thought of it from scratch, how would you redesign school? Going back to this issue of diversity, by bringing all the different thinkers into the room, you would probably come up with a very different system. So I think every organization could rethink how they do things
and be provoked by bringing a lot of diversity into the room to create new thoughts. And it also applies probably at the very extreme, to government, because it's very challenging in those environments to create really different thoughts. And I think anywhere where there are structures that are not clearly delivering, the more diversity in the thinking will help create at least a lot of good questions as to, is this really making any sense? Yeah. And a lot of times the answer is actually no, but we're still doing it anyway.
So 2 things come to mind. Where do people get stuck in that process? They have the conversation, but where do they get stuck between the conversation and the execution? And then secondly, how do we measure it? Because I think that is part of the problem of getting to that.
How do you measure
the success of this holistic approach?
Right.
We can measure grades, we can measure, how do we measure this beautiful thing over here that you've just described?
Don't know. How do people get stuck? I think, I was talking to someone else earlier about design thinking. The guys from, I can't remember what the organization is. No, the other one.
Woods.
Yeah. Yep. And I was saying that I thought that, we have maths, English, whatever the requirements are at high school as standard papers. And I fundamentally believe design thinking should be a standard paper at school, because design thinking can be applied to everything. If everyone could think like a designer, they could apply that thinking to all the problems and the solutions that they're seeking in their lives, whether it's, my God, I hate my wife, how do I get out of this situation? Or whether it's, I hate my career, how do I create a new one? Or whether it's, this product is failing, what are the different options? Design thinking is a way of thinking that most people are not taught. And I'm not saying it's the only way, but it's one way to think that opens up an enormous expanse of various views as to how you can move forward. And I think people get stuck when they can't see different options, when they can only see a very limited path and neither of them are working for them. So for me, I've always done 2 things when I've got stuck. 1, tried to think like a designer, and 2, tried to make my problems really seem very, very small. So the way I do that is look at other people's problems, which are much bigger. So the really big problems in the world make my problems feel really, really small. It helps me relax, and I can breathe, and I go, you're just one person trying to live a life, and there are so many people out there that are really actually struggling, and your problems are not, they're not really material. So those 2 perspectives are the things that have helped me, at least, figure out ways forward, back to the stuck thing. Measurement is a big challenge. So when you look at the business issue, when you talked about the business earlier, measurement is as old as business in terms of P&Ls, profit and loss, balance sheets. They haven't changed, I actually don't know when they started, but probably 500 years. So we measure business today in the same way as we measured it half a millennia ago, right? And that's our only tool. And clearly that's ridiculous, because business impacts society, and this last 20, 30 years, the planet, more and more and more and more, that we need to measure in different ways. Yeah. So on that front, people are creating new methods of measuring social impact, environmental impact, and incorporating them into business models. In terms of individual human beings, I'm not sure how you do that. Your question was, it's very hard to measure this utopia, holistic view.
Yeah. Well, it's that holistic view, and it's also that ability to scale it. Because what happens in education systems, large systems, is they need to, it's hard to bring a customized approach and then scale it. So how that, and I think that's often
Well, I think this is what, at AUT particularly, like we're going through this process now, thinking out how do you create new models, because, I met a graduate yesterday who wanted to intern on some of the projects we're working on, or 2 days ago. And she said, this is what we measured on, this is how we approach it. And I said, how long do you think people care about those grades? And I say, well, once you've got the role or the job, they probably never look at them again. If you don't deliver, it doesn't matter what grade you had. Yeah. If you deliver, people are just going to push you forward. So how do you enable that to happen without the judgment on the grades? And then I was talking to someone else this evening about their it was your kid, actually, wasn't it? The robot,
Which
the
one?
engineer.
Oh yeah, that's not mine, but I know I've got many, but not that one. Yeah.
But he's not an academic. He doesn't.
Ethan. Yes, yes. Okay, sorry.
And so,
different conversation. Yep.
So people learn in different ways and they have very different skills.
Yep.
And there's a significant portion of the society that is not designed to study and get A's.
Yep.
So why do we have a system that forces them to go through it?
Sure.
Again, it makes no sense, but yet we keep doing it. So you have to have different ways of assessing, are these kids making progress? Are they succeeding? Are they happy? And it's not, are they passing their tests?
Right.
I don't know what it is, but it's just definitely not that. It's clearly not that.
Yeah.
You said I was a friend of Richard Branson. He dropped out of school at 15. Not only because he wanted to start things, but actually he's just not academically at all inclined, at all. So, it's just crazy to think that we're still here believing that this is the right way to do it.
Yeah. That's great. Last question. Do you want a drink of water or anything before we start?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm under control.
Okay. You've talked in the past of the merits of One Young World Conference. And that's a conference that gathers the brightest young leaders from around the world, 18 to 30-year-olds, and empowers them to make lasting connections, develop solutions to some of the world's most pressing issues. So let's take that to New Zealand. If New Zealand, or the Western Bay of Plenty, where we are right now, continues to strive to lead the way, to do the stuff we're doing already, is there a scope for something more localized? Or in particular, could we host something like that here in the Bay? Again, call to action.
Yeah, so One Young World is a conference gathering started by a couple of people that were running a big media agency called Havas, CEO David Jones and his partner Kate Robertson. And their goal was to create an event that had the same geographic diversity as the Olympics and brought together both people who were privileged, kids who were privileged and kids who were not privileged or underprivileged or from really meager means into the same place to be inspired by leaders from all around the world and to work together on issues. So the model is really simple. It costs $5,000 per kid, but kids are all sponsored by a company. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it still costs you $5,000. They'll cover the cost of the airfare and everything. So it's kind of the simplest way of making it equal. You have to get a company to sponsor you. And they all go to a particular country for a few days, and they call them counselors, but the counselors are basically icons of our generation. So everyone from Kofi Annan, who ran the UN, to Richard Branson, to Muhammad Yunus, who's a microfinance pioneer, to Ariane Huffington, Bob Geldof. They have just dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And these leaders come and they interact with the kids. They have panels, they have conferences, they do workshops. And they're trying to invigorate these young people to think about what their role in the world is and how they can best achieve it. So that's a global thing, which I think we should send New Zealanders to that. So a company in the Bay of Plenty could easily go on to the One Young World website and decide to sponsor 1 or 2 kids or young people, and they would have an experience that would change their world. That's obviously very actionable. This doesn't cost a lot of money at all. Yeah. I know that maybe 1 or 2 kids from New Zealand go a year. The second thing, though, is in New Zealand, we don't have a very significant movement of young people organized collectively around how they're going to become the most impactful citizens of New Zealand that they can be. Whether they leave and come back or whether they stay, there isn't really a structure. In Australia, they have something called the Young Australians Foundation, which is now like a powerhouse. They raised $50 million as their endowment, so they now have multiple millions of dollars a year to run this organization, and the whole purpose is to create a movement of all young Australians aspiring to do as much as they can for Australia and for the world. So there are discussions around why we don't have that in New Zealand, how can we create it, and the person most passionate about this is Sam Johnson, who created the Student Volunteer Army in Christchurch, and is very close to the Young Australians Foundation. And so when you think about why we don't have it, why can't we even start on a small scale, the question then is, well, why can't it be here? Or why can't it be based here? Or why can't it start here? So creating some kind of a national network that is starting to create a cluster of our most
talented young people, again, talent not meaning you just getting straight A's, but the people who have raw energy and passion to create change, is an opportunity for New Zealand. And so, in your comment about action, it's really a baton that's being waiting for someone to say, well, actually, we want to do that. Wellington wants to be the city that becomes the capital of youth leaders, or Tauranga does, or whatever. And there are people willing to try and make it happen. It's just that there isn't yet enough structure or framework or someone going, yeah, I'm going to do this. There's lots of opportunity.
So what are some of the first steps? And also in that question is, what does talent look like? And you gave a couple of terms, but are there some stories of people that have attended, or what talent looks like in these different phases for young people?
It's very broad, right? It's kids like these kids who put their hands up, be part of an organization or a competition, and put their energy into creating something new and different, an experience they've never had. It's kids that have that natural bent for trying to get involved in issues and community challenges and just do it anyway, even though they might not be the brightest kids in the room. It's the kids who are really super smart and amazingly talented at presenting and public speaking, and they want to be the future Prime Minister. It's kids who are really talented on the sports field, but have a broader perspective about what might happen if they become really successful as an athlete. I mean, these people are all over the place. It's just about finding them and asking them, do you want to be part of a broader movement? And, can we start? Can we try? And when you think about TED, which everyone knows now, what is TED? I mean, it really started as a conversation in California, in Monterey, or I think it was at Carmel, in a tiny little town. And they just invited some interesting people, and they just started a conversation. And another movement of recent years is called Summit Series, which was started by really, really young people, which is trying to bring people from all different walks of life working on problems and social problems and entrepreneurs together. And they also started a conversation, just brought 20 of the most interesting people into one particular place in San Francisco. And now that's a community of like 10,000 people. The kids who started that were about 21 and 22 and 23. They're now like 29. They decided to buy a mountain and create a community. And so there are 28-year-olds who raised $50 million, bought a mountain called Powder Mountain. They've renamed it Eden. And basically decided they're actually going to set up a whole town for this community to gravitate around. And they sold off blocks of land, and they parceled it up. And they have people who are permanent residents, semi-permanent residents, and they create a year-long program of content, curated activity about change, impact, environment, business, entrepreneurship, design. And I mean, literally, people who are 23 thinking they could change the world. So if that can happen, why can't it happen here? It can happen anywhere. It's just about getting a community of small community of people focused on it.
Fantastic. I'm going to bring Andrew up to field some questions from the audience.
Firstly, how about a round of applause for Tina and Derek? Some fantastic insights, so thanks very much, Derek. And we now have a wee challenge. So we have some time for questions. We are videoing, so we need to have a microphone for whoever asks a question. So we've got a couple of team members, Cameron and Susanna, who'll be running around and thrusting a microphone in front of you. So we make no apologies. But look, any questions? The floor is open. Lady at the back there.
How could we get the government to put the 100 million instead of into the Sky City into creating what Derek described as a place for young people to go out there and grow?
It's a really, really, really good question. And like I said this morning, I do these reflection periods, and part of that is I take books that I've read over the last year and I look at what I've underscored and I kind of think about them. And one of the books I was reading last year was about how to be an activist. And it was written in the 50s or 60s, and it inspired Barack Obama when he was in Chicago and creating movements. And it's almost like the manifesto for how to create revolution or change. And one of the things that I got up to this today was you have to work and understand the existing system and start from there. And I think this is what lots of people who want to create change forget. They want to like make it to the new future immediately, and that's always how I've behaved. And I think the challenge we have, for better or worse, is we have a government for the next 2.5 years. I don't think I'm out of place in saying it, but I just don't think they get it. So if you have that, then it's difficult. And you have to figure out how to start in baby steps. And part of that, I was talking to a really senior business leader in New Zealand about how do we move this narrative forward. And he said, you just have to start by doing things that almost demonstrate what it is you're trying to do for them to see and then for them to support, versus my former approach was to try and inspire or preach, there is a way forward, it's happening, we can do these things. So it's difficult, but there are lots of positive things that the government is supporting. They do have a lot of money, they do put it behind interesting things, and I think they do it when they see people who are committed, they're achieving some results, and they can somehow connect the dots as to how it's helping us move forward. So yeah, what I thought about in the last year with regards to this current government is do things, pilot and demonstrate progress, and keep them in the loop along the whole way. And maybe at the beginning you might ask them for support or feedback or whatever, but they might say no, and you say, okay, well, we'll just send you an update every couple of months as to how we're going. And also do that across multiple ministries and multiple ministers. I think that's the most... Obviously, I haven't done this yet, but I was thinking about what you might do to try and get the help of government on issues. That's kind of the approach I think I would take. With regards to the $100 million to Sky City, I mean, I just think that's just the old model. I don't think that's what we should be doing with publicly listed gambling companies. I just think it doesn't make any sense. And I don't know many New Zealanders who do, actually. And I think that's what happens when you get into a situation with a third term. They'll make decisions that I don't think reflect New Zealanders' values. I don't think you'll find a single New Zealander who thinks that's the right thing to do, to be honest.
So what could an activist do to change that?
About that?
Yeah.
God knows, I don't know. It's like it's sailed down the river, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to mobilize people to get out there these days, I think. I don't know.
Thanks. Next question. Jed, microphone.
Hi, if you're talking about what could you do, probably, I hope they're not videoing this, but Guy Fawkes probably, hope they censor that. Derek, just wondering, you talked about what books are you reading. What are your top 3 books that you've just read?
Oh, so I have this problem where I read like 20 books at the same time. to kind of try and plow through them. But so I was on this mission a few years ago. I decided to read one major... I never really thought about religion for a long time, so I thought, oh, well, I'll figure out what the story is here. So I'm going to read each major text over the next few years. So last year it was the Indian text called the Bhagavad Gita, which is a really interesting... it's a story, but it's a really spiritual and enlightening... it's a very short book, but it took me a really long time to read it. The year before I read the Bible, this year I'm going to read the Quran. And so that was a really great story about, well, not story, a great text about the circular nature of life, the duality of everything that we decide, every decision we make. There's a positive, there's a negative. There's always there's always more than one right way, and it was really a reflective text. And similarly, I've picked up this book called I can't remember the name, but it's about Zen. It's basically lectures from a Zen master, and it's similar things. It's like, how do you think about the challenges in the world, your role in it? How do you be calm? How do you keep your mind quiet? Those kinds of things, and those things are really interesting for me over summer while I'm planning, the year. In terms of actual substance or narratives, I'm reading Mandela's biography because I've been told for a long time to read it, and now I'm kind of getting along on that. And I think that those tales of people who've really gone through really interesting struggles and have taken the time to put them down is really, they're really fascinating books. So I'm kind of halfway through that and, really, really enjoying it.
Another question. I'm going to challenge this side of the room to come up with a question soon.
Yeah, Derek, so you mentioned your earlier endeavours with businesses. You were basically, you're based on profits. That's what you're looking at as your measures of success. So what moved you towards the social side of things, and how did that crossover begin?
It's a really good question, and it's a very personal experience. I think everyone has an experience that changes their minds about key things in their lives. Why I was there in the first place was because everything I'd read about business and entrepreneurs told me that that was the answer. You build businesses, you create as much wealth as you can, and all that type of stuff. And then what started to change my mind was really a crisis. The financial crisis, which caused a big crisis on our company and my family, because all my family was in our company. My dad, my two brothers worked in it, and we were deeply invested in it. It was really, our future was almost intertwined with it, not just our jobs, but our assets. And in the financial crisis, we were really, virtually out of business for a little while. And that's when I just really started thinking, okay, if this happens again, because I'd already lost the business, 10 years before, what am I going to do? Like, what am I here for? And it just started a whole series of questions. What am I good at? What do I want to use those skills for? And, I had the same answers to what I'm good at. I think I'm good at helping build companies or build an idea or having a vision, building a team. But to what end is the questions that I started to ask. And what happens is when you're on this kind of track, let's call it the success track, because I've kind of come up with this, not come up with this, but the way I see things now is I think success is interesting, but I think significance is far more important. So how do you lead a significant life? And so the success track is become successful, do everything you can, and then at the end, think about how you might be significant to the world, how you might participate in the community's problems. That's what I was doing for the first 10 years. So I'll just fix this company, I'll sell it, and then I'll figure out how to contribute to the world and understand what the problems are. So that means 10 years of not thinking about how other people's lives are, how the planet is what poverty is, all those kind of things. I never really thought about them because I thought, oh, I'll figure that out later. So this Christmas, New Year's period in the recession, I just started asking all these questions. And I was like, well, as long as these things exist, I need to find a way to contribute to them. And I can also see a trend that there's a role for entrepreneurs to play in helping solve those issues. And that's really when I started to go, oh, that might be where I need to go. And then it took a couple years, but it was a light bulb that happened at the worst moment in my life. I think generally people think of me as, oh, you sold the Hyper Factory, so you made some money and then you thought, how are you going to be a good person? It's actually the reverse. It was when I actually had almost lost the company that I'd thought, oh, this is not actually what it's about. It's about this other whole set of things, and that's what I need to find the answer to.
Thanks.
Oh. I think I have the mic, so I get to ask the question and then I'll pass it at the front. I just want to make some comments around your comments on diversity, and then I have a question. You stated that you thought New Zealand had done pretty well in the past in terms of gender diversity and governance, and I think the studies have shown that we were at our best somewhere around the 30% in the 70s, and that's gone down quite rapidly to currently about 19% of publicly listed companies being women. The international studies have clearly shown there's a strong correlation between listed companies and corporate social responsibility, and approximately a minimum of 30% gender diversity sitting at the board table. And I wondered what you thought about the government's in New Zealand's response to that in terms of the NZX rules requiring a limp-wristed voluntary announcement of their policy on gender, as opposed to Australia and other jurisdictions, and whether you consider there needs to be more of a prod in that direction for New Zealand really to address this issue in the next 10 to 15 years, which you think is needed.
So just on the report perspective, I wasn't talking about just boards. I was talking about the UN has this report I think they release every year, which is just holistically it talks about diversity and gender equality. And so it measures any number of things. But it had been slipping significantly in New Zealand over the last few years, and the culprits that, they measure it across a number of metrics. One of them is board management, those kind of things. There's lots of other measurements like, can you vote, can you drive, those other things, which other countries you can't. So on the board front, it's really a difficult thing because some countries or some people believe that quotas or targets are the solution. And then some people believe that that's actually not the solution because, let them get there on their own. If they're good enough, they should get a seat at the table. And it's a really challenging debate. Like I think in the Nordic countries there are targets, you must meet them, and they gave them 3 years to do so. But you're right, because report after report after report has proven now, like empirically, a clear connection between financial performance, the traditional metrics of success in a company with diversity on boards. So at this point, you're having to think, you'd have to be a chairman or a CEO that doesn't get it or isn't reading the news to not think you need to start moving that direction. I think it's probably more about movement building and pressure building than about policies. And there are some organisations in New Zealand that try to do that, but I don't think anywhere near enough. So someone was saying, how would you become, be an activist against the Sky City proposal? Well, that's really challenging, and it's a short-term thing, and it's probably going to happen. But from a perspective of diversity on boards, I think there could be a lot stronger of a movement to help make that happen. And that's probably the best solution, or even maybe more education as to the empirical results and the proof of this is working. So, anecdote from my own personal perspective, we're in the early stages of creating a fund that's going to invest in early stage ventures, like tech ventures that can scale rapidly, but all of them have to have a very clear social lens, and they almost all will have to be, if they're in America, like benefit corporations. And one of our investment theories, so normally an investment fund has like categories, like it might be in health and other things. We're not 100% decided on this yet, but one of our theories might be having a very strong bias to female entrepreneurs and female-led businesses, because there is this huge diversity gap in funding that people are actually finding that there's actually a reverse bias. Female entrepreneurs are struggling to get funding, and venture capitalists are being negatively biased towards them. We think that's a huge opportunity. So at all levels, there's like things you can do. At the corporate level, though, I think it's more of a movement than anything else. It's about creating a concerted effort to set a national goal and try and get, it's so small in New Zealand. All you'd have to do is get 50 boards to decide something, which means probably 10 directors because they sit across all those boards, and create some movement. So there's so many opportunities to do so many things to create positive change, but I can't do them all. I'm only one guy. We can do it together.
I'm pretty sure there's a couple people in the room that might be able to help you. I'll whisper their names when we're finished.
There was another question over there, I think, with the microphone. Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me that I see across different sizes of businesses is the reward structure. And I feel that that's broken. That the financial crisis that we've endured is actually largely related to what motivated people leading large companies. So I see a massive challenge in shifting that. And even at a social level, a shift from wanting the latest and greatest, largest car, largest house, whatever, to the trend towards trying to come up with a really, really small home and being creative around spaces. So, yeah, I think there's a need to shift that. And how do you see that happening?
The measurement thing is, or the rewards incentive structure is something that's also getting traction around the world to address some of those issues. But it kind of all comes down to with big companies anyway, it comes down to short-termism. So they're reporting every 90 days, and they're being forced to have more and more compressed timelines as to how they show their progress, which means that impacts all the different incentive structures. And it's what largely creates something like the financial crisis, because the people who are making those decisions are thinking about their bonus this half or this year, not thinking about, well, if this happens for the next 5 years, what will actually happen to the whole bank? And those are the kind of things that are major challenges. But how do you address them? With the B team, which is this global leadership collective looking at these issues, we look at them from a system perspective. And so from a systems perspective, there are multiple pressure points as to how you change something like that. Some of those things are, what do major shareholders ask for? What do boards ask for? And how do you create new solutions? So what would be great is if huge shareholders like pension funds started demanding longer-term incentive programs for senior management and actually incorporating other outcomes like social or environmental targets, not just financial targets. But those things are slow in the making, but they're happening when you see someone like the Nordics pull out of coal. It's a similar type of thing. It's a message to the market. And I think all those things are in progress and take a long time. But the bad thing is that company CEOs, for example, now, the tenure has gone from something like an average of 10 years to 3 years for everywhere in the world. So if you're only there for 3 years, it's really hard to think about doing the right thing for the next 10 years, which is what they really should be doing. Because if you're a big corporate CEO, you're meant to be stewarding a company's longevity, not its next earnings call.
And don't you think, though, that it's come from the drive, in particular from the banking industry, that people should be creating businesses for exit? Everybody talks about your exit strategy. And therefore, I see this pressure on shifting away from actually a sustainable business model to what can we convince the market we're worth now, and let's exit before it implodes.
Yeah, no, it's difficult.
Yeah. Time for one last question out the...
All right, cheers. Thanks, Derek. I've just got, I don't know, just some random thoughts. I don't know just if you'd give me some feedback, but I was thinking about the Nordic thing, and, is that just the Nordic coal situation? Is that just a situation where, everyone's become more familiar, educated about coal and the adverse effects to the planet, and they've obviously seen, all of a sudden that's got some value because their coal investments don't have any value. So is one of the pathways to your new models basically educating the importance of, these environmental factors, these social factors, and then all of a sudden, the broader population sees, oh, there is some value in that, and then that changes the behaviour of corporates. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, some of the comments you touched on before about the corporate pay structure, the distribution of some of that wealth, I don't know, dare I say it, but does that start at the family level, with values? Because, I think about when people come through the corporate culture, companies can have values, but it really can't, it starts quite early to have someone, to have good ethics and stuff. So just your thoughts around that would be useful.
Yeah, I think you talk about as education. Whenever, an idea or a movement needs to become mainstream, it's partly about education, it's partly about inspiration, it's partly about seeing models in action. And I liken the movement that we're in at the moment, or that we're at the beginning of at the moment, of course its impact is not going to be the same probably, but I liken it to the way the design movement happened when people started to see what Steve Jobs was doing. So he changed the role of design in the world, where in 2002 or 3, they thought it was a nice, cute thing to have in the corner and you could have 5% market share. And now he showed them that you can create a $10 billion company with design as your strategy, and then a $50 billion, and then a $100 billion, and then and then he just took over the whole world through design. And then every other company wants to be the Apple of this and the Apple of that. So illustration or examples that actually exist in the world are far more powerful than theories and putting it in like a speech or something. So what's happening now is you're having this happen in all manner. So you are having it happening in education. You are having it in the zeitgeist or popular culture. You are having it happen in business leaders showing the way. And all these things need to happen more and more for this movement to pick up momentum to create, that tipping point. And that's really the most interesting thing, is we're getting there. And when I started, on this journey, back to the guy's question about why did you start this, or how, that was in 2009-ish. So fast forward 5 years. Started creating the B team, which is this organization, in 2012, and the change that's happened in the last 2 years is extreme, of these new types of thinking. And when you have icons that come out and start saying the way we're doing things is not going to work, we need to create new things, then other people listen, because they don't want to be the ones that are left out, but also they respect those people. So when you have Tim Cook, who runs Apple, last year he started coming out a lot of things. It's almost like he left the first year to let Steve Jobs' legacy kind of quieten down, and now he's coming out. First of all, he came out as a human being. Then he came out big time on climate. Now he's coming big time on other issues, and I think those are the things that change people's perception. And it's no different to a lot of the ideological shifts that happen in society. It takes people who have great respect to speak out, and then things change. And I mean, I'm an optimist because I think every time I see things happening in the world, I see more and more of this stuff, and it's, it's important and it'll happen. It might take another 10 years.
Thanks very much for the questions. We have run out of time now, but of course, I think you're being whisked off to dinner later on, but Tina, are you going to let Derek stay a little bit longer, or?
He's in charge. He stays as long as he wants.
Okay. So Derek will be here, and you're very welcome for a few more drinks and nibbles outside here and here. Derek, I really want to thank you for your thought-provoking conversation. I love the fact that you're challenging New Zealand to lead the way here, and certainly I think there's an opportunity for Tauranga to lead the way as well, and I think that's about creating a movement here, so I'm very excited about that. So please join me in thanking Derek.
Awesome.
And hands up who would like to be doing Tina's job and interviewing Derek. So thank you, Tina, and please join me in thanking. Just a few quick other thanks. I can't not thank Gail Elliott, our CEO. In fact, there's an urban myth that I'm the CEO of Priority1, and it's Gail Elliott who's actually our office administrator, but does everything. And so thank you, Gail, for organising this. Tina mentioned Sally Cook and a team at Tuscany put together the video, helped us with the questions and de-stressed us, so thank you to them. Also to the ASB Arena team, so thank you very much, Amy and the team here. Please stay and join us for a drink. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.